He built an empire but couldn't rebuild what he lost. For a year, millionaire Ethan Cole cried at his son's grave, never realizing the boy was still alive, watching him from the shadows. Before we dive in, tell us where in the world you're watching this from. And get ready, because today's story will remind you that love never really dies. It just finds a way home. The first crack of thunder didn't come from the sky. It came from inside the Cole mansion, Ethan's voice striking marble and glass like lightning. "Elena, stop telling me how to be a father." He stood at the edge of the kitchen island, knuckles pale against dark stone. The room was all clean lines and stainless steel, a cathedral of success that smelled faintly of lemon polish and coffee that had gone cold. Elena didn't flinch, though her hands trembled. "I'm not telling you how," she said softly. "I'm asking you to be one." Rain hurled itself against the high windows. Through the glass, the city was a blurred watercolor of red taillights and long shadows. Somewhere upstairs, a bedroom door clicked open, curious feet on wooden steps, but the storm swallowed the sound. "I work for him. For you," Elena continued, voice steadying. "But I'm not a substitute heartbeat. Jamie needs you, Ethan, not your signature, not your staff, you." Ethan's jaw locked. He was a tall man with the look of someone who had won every fight simply by refusing to lose. The tailored suit couldn't hide how small he felt tonight. "My son has a home, a school, security. All the things I didn't have. That's being a father. That's being a provider," Elena said. "It's not the same thing." Silence stretched. A clock ticked on the far wall. His clock, the one with the silver hands that swept time with a soft, precise whisper. He'd worn the same brand on his wrist since the day Nora gave him one as a gift. The original sat in a drawer he hadn't opened since the funeral. This one was newer, colder. "Elena," he said at last. Voice sanded down to something dangerous. "You've crossed a line." Her throat moved. "Maybe, but he waited by the window for you for hours. He counted headlights because you said you'd be home by 7. She glanced at the digital display on the stove. "It's 11. Ethan's mouth opened and closed. The storm made the lights flicker. The house blinked, a giant holding its breath. He gripped the edge of the counter as if the room were tilting. "Do not stand in my kitchen and accuse me of loving him." Elena shook her head, tears brightening her eyes without falling. "I know you do. But grief builds walls, Ethan, and Jamie doesn't know how to climb them." The name, his son's small, stubborn name, knocked something loose. He saw flashes, a paper crown made from a receipt, a dinosaur toy jabbed into a potted plant, Nora's laugh blending with Jamie's until he could not tell where one ended and the other began. He looked away quickly as if memory were rude. "You're fired," he said. He could hear Elena's breath leave her, not a gasp, more like a soft, surprised "oh" that did not try to change his mind. She swallowed and nodded as if he'd just confirmed something she'd hoped wasn't true. "I'll pack," she whispered. "Now." She flinched. "Jamie is asleep," Ethan said, though he didn't know if it was true. He didn't know much anymore except numbers and square footage and the feeling of walking past a small, hopeful face because he was afraid of what he'd see reflected in those eyes. "Take your pay through the week. Security will—" "Security?" She gave a breaking laugh. "Who are you protecting yourself from, Ethan?" He didn't answer. He couldn't. She left with quiet feet and the clock's whisper filled the space she'd vacated. The rain leaned harder on the glass, impatient, as if the sky itself were knocking to be let in. Ethan poured another coffee and didn't drink it. He stood there long after the kitchen returned to its curated silence, long after the argument became a stain he kept trying to rub out of his mind. When he finally moved, it was toward the staircase. He paused at Jamie's door. A handmade sign hung crookedly from blue ribbon. "Jamie's lab. Do not enter unless you bring snacks." He opened it carefully. The small lamp on the dresser cast a sleepy glow over everything that made sense in the world. Dinosaur stickers patterned a worn trunk. A fort made of blankets slumped like an old castle. On the bed, a boy lay sprawled diagonally, hair messy, mouth slightly open, one knee bare where the blanket tangled. The toy plane, white with a red tail Jamie had colored in with a marker, perched on the nightstand like it was ready to taxi down a runway and vanish into dreams. Ethan stepped in, the floor creaking a friendly hello. It didn't offer him anywhere else. He stood beside the bed and watched his son breathe. He should touch his shoulder. He should say, "I'm sorry I'm late," and mean more than that. He should ask about spelling tests and the way the cafeteria pizza always leaned to one side, and if the kid down the hall still traded marbles for comic books. He should say the name Nora out loud so it wouldn't gather dust like everything else. Tomorrow, he whispered, and hated himself for how easily he believed it. He brushed a strand of hair from Jamie's forehead without letting his fingers linger, and slipped out. Downstairs, Elena set a small duffel beside the front door. She wore her oldest coat, the one with the elbow patch sewn on with mismatched thread. She stood for a moment, hand on the knob, and then let it drop. The old clock in the foyer matched the one in the kitchen beat for beat. Ethan thought briefly of metronomes and orchestras and how grief kept time like the strictest conductor. He approached, hands in his pockets. "There's no need to say goodbye to him," he said, trying to keep his voice even. "It'll only confuse Elena." The voice from the staircase was small and full of sleep. Jamie stood there, hair sticking up, pajamas printed with moons and a fox that seemed mid-scamper. Elena closed her eyes for a second before she turned. "Hey, astronaut, you're leaving?" Jamie descended step by careful step, as if he were crossing a river on stones. "Just for a bit," she said. "Grown-up stuff, boring. You'll fall asleep hearing about it." Jamie's eyes slid to Ethan, then back to her. "Will you come back?" Elena's mouth opened. She looked at Ethan. He stared at the brass door handle as if it held an answer. The rain thudded harder on the foyer skylight. "I'll try," she said, and even the storm seemed to soften at the word. Jamie moved the rest of the way down and wrapped his arms around her waist. She hugged him with a fierceness that belonged to goodbye and to prayer. Ethan looked away. Minutes later, the front door opened. Wet air came in like a stray dog, cold and curious. Elena stepped into the night. Ethan stood in the foyer until the door clicked shut and the house sighed around him. He told himself he'd done the right thing. Boundaries. Order. That was how you kept the eggshell world from cracking all the way through. "Dad?" Jamie said, voice small. "Can I sleep in your room?" The syllable caught in Ethan's throat. Nora used to ask him things he wasn't ready to answer and then smile when he did anyway. He looked at his son, at the way his hands twisted the hem of his pajama shirt. "Tomorrow," Ethan said again, and hated the word more. "It's late. Go back to bed." Jamie nodded, the way children learn to fold themselves smaller. He climbed the stairs. Halfway up, he turned and looked back at the door Elena had walked through, and then up at his father, whose face had the same set it always did when he was pretending not to hurt. In Jamie's room, the toy plane waited. He picked it up, pressed the red tail to his cheek, then tucked it under his arm as if it could lead him somewhere brave. He stood at the window. Elena's hatchback sat in the circle of light from the driveway lamp, its windshield glossed with rain. The wipers lifted, swept, like a hand waving hello and goodbye at the same time. Jamie's heart made a decision before his brain did. He slid the window open a careful inch, then more. The rain smelled like metal and wet leaves. He shrugged on his hoodie and his little backpack, the one with the fox, and hugged the plane tighter. On the landing, the old house had a soft step beside the bookcase. He put his weight on the other boards, then tiptoed down, his small shape a shadow among shadows. At the door, he hesitated. He could still run back, crawl into bed, wait for tomorrow to be just a word again. But the thought of Elena's empty chair at breakfast felt like winter in his chest. He opened the door. Air full of rain kissed his face. Outside, Elena had just started the engine. The car's lights threw gold across the wet brick. Jamie darted through the rain, sneakers splashing. He tugged at the passenger door. It opened with a hiccup of a squeak. Elena gasped. "Jamie, no, what are you doing?" Her hands, always sure, were clumsy on the seatbelt buckle. "You have to go inside." "Your dad." "Please don't leave me," he blurted, voice shaking with the courage it takes to tell the truth. "If you go, it'll just be quiet all the time." The sentence cut something open in both of them. Elena's eyes flashed toward the mansion. She could picture Ethan in the foyer, stone and careful. She could picture him on the stairs tomorrow morning, finding no small boy in a moonfox shirt. Her breath trembled. "I'll drive you around the block," she said at last, desperate for a compromise with the universe. "Just once. Then you go straight up to bed. Promise?" Jamie nodded so hard his hair flopped into his eyes. She checked his belt twice, then 3 times. The wipers kept their patient rhythm. "One circle," she repeated, as if the storm might hear and agree to that one simple thing. They pulled away. The driveway blurred into street, street into river. The city was a chandelier of distant lights behind the rain. Jamie pressed his palm to the window and drew a crooked heart on the fogged glass. Inside the heart he wrote a letter with his fingertip, E. Elena glanced at him and smiled that half-sad way she had. E for Elena. E for everything, he said. And Ethan, her hands tightened on the wheel. We'll be back in 5 minutes, she told herself as much as him. We'll be back before the clock blinks 11:15, The curve came fast, faster than usual because water turns familiar streets into strangers. The tires nudged the painted line, then slid. Elena turned the wheel small and steady the way every driver's ed instructor teaches you, and no storm respects. The car fishtailed, a quiet, helpless dance. Jamie's toy plane slipped from his lap. He grabbed for it. The seatbelt held him in place like a warning and a promise. It's okay, Elena said, voice thin, trained for comfort. We're okay. A branch hurled by the wind slammed across the hood with a thud that wasn't loud at all, a small sound in a loud night. The car jerked. A tire kissed the curb, then climbed it. The hatchback shuddered, went still. For a moment. The world was nothing but rain and the metallic tick of cooling engine parts. Tiny reminders that even machines have heartbeats after they should be quiet. Elena exhaled in a laugh that wasn't a laugh. See, we're fine. Her hands were shaking so hard she had to ask them to stop. We're fine. Jamie's eyes were wide. That was like when the roller coaster pretends to break. Best part, she said. Though her stomach had fallen 12 stories, she put the car in reverse, turned slowly, made the smallest circle any car had ever made. Back toward the mansion, the driveway lamp was a miracle in a halo. A lighthouse telling 2 ships they were already home. Inside the house, Ethan stood in the foyer still as a statue that had already decided what it meant. The clock in the kitchen ticked 11:14. He looked at the front door without knowing why, then at the shadow of a Fox backpack on the stairs that shouldn't have been where it was. For the first time that night, fear had a shape. He opened the door. Rain walked in. Far down the street, red taillights paused, then crept toward him like the slow return of something precious that had almost slipped away. Ethan's watch whispered on his wrist, a soft, relentless tick, 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 as if time itself were leaning forward to listen, and above them all the storm kept the beat. The morning after the storm was quiet, too quiet for a city that usually woke with sirens and engines and coffee brewing in glass towers. The world had pressed pause as if afraid to move forward without permission. A blue hatchback lay crumpled against a guardrail on the edge of the river road. Smoke curled from the hood, thin and ghostly. The rain had washed away most of the fire, but not the smell of it. Paramedics worked silently, their boots sinking into the mud. One of them, a man with a trimmed beard and eyes that didn't blink enough, moved slower than the rest. His name tag read Miles Turner. He knelt near the wreck, shining his flashlight into the shattered interior. "Driver's alive," someone called. Miles didn't answer. His light had caught on something small, a toy airplane, white with a red tail resting beside a tiny shoe. He looked around. No one saw him reach in and lift it. His fingers brushed damp fabric, warm breath. He froze, a child, alive. Jamie's eyes fluttered open, then closed again. Miles stared for a heartbeat too long. Then something old and hard in his face shifted. He looked over his shoulder. 2 more medics were pulling Elena from the other side, calling for a stretcher. Miles's mind moved faster than his conscience. "No survivors in the back," he shouted, his voice sharp, authoritative. The others didn't question it. The car was a furnace minutes ago. By the time the police arrived, Miles was gone. So was Jamie. When Jamie woke again, the world was dim and wooden. A cabin. The ceiling beams looked like ribs. A single kerosene lamp painted the walls gold. He tried to sit up. Pain bit his shoulder. His throat was dry, but when he turned his head, he saw the toy plane beside him. Clean now, its red tail gleaming faintly. "Hey, easy there," a voice said. Miles stood in the doorway, coat draped over one arm, a bowl of soup in the other. "You took a rough tumble," Jamie blinked. Where's my dad?" His voice was hoarse, thin like the wind slipping through cracks. Miles's jaw worked once, twice. Then he exhaled slow. "Son, there was an accident. I pulled you out, but..." He looked down as if the words were too heavy to meet Jamie's eyes. "Your folks didn't make it." Jamie's lips parted, but no sound came. Only the faint ticking from Miles's old pocket watch filled the room. Days turned into weeks. Miles's cabin sat on the far edge of town, near where the highway turned into forest. No neighbors, no mail. Only the sound of rain that came and went like a restless friend. Jamie's injuries healed fast for a boy who refused to cry. Every morning he'd stand by the window watching mist crawl through the trees. "Why can't we go to the city?" he asked one morning. Miles spooned sugar into his coffee. "Too loud. Too many people asking too many questions," Jamie frowned. "But my dad, he'll be looking for me." Miles's spoon froze midair. "Son," he said gently, "nobody's looking anymore." The boy didn't argue. But that night when Miles snored in his armchair, Jamie opened the drawer beside the bed. Inside lay a folded newspaper. Its headline yellowed, "Real estate tycoon Ethan Cole buries only son in private ceremony." The photo showed his father, face pale, eyes hidden behind dark glasses, standing beside a white coffin. Jamie's heart clenched. He traced the edges of the image with one trembling finger. His reflection wavered in the glass like someone half remembered. "He thinks I'm gone," he whispered. Miles had his reasons for keeping Jamie hidden. The boy's presence had started as impulse, then turned into convenience. A quiet child drew sympathy. People gave more when you said, "My nephew lost his parents." They stayed on the road for months. Bus stations, cheap motels, alley corners where pity was a currency. Miles wasn't cruel, not exactly. But kindness cost him something he no longer wanted to pay. Jamie learned quickly when to smile, when to stay silent, when to look hungry but not hopeless. Sometimes at night, Miles would hand him $1 and say, "Good work today." Jamie would lie awake afterward, clutching his toy plane, whispering Dad wouldn't call it work. He began to dream again. The dreams were full of rain, of footsteps on marble floors, of a deep voice saying, "Tomorrow," and always. At the end of every dream, a ticking. Meanwhile, Ethan Cole was unraveling. The mansion felt too big for one person and too haunted for two. He'd moved into the smallest guest room and sold off the others floor by floor, like amputating pieces of himself. Every corner whispered Jamie's name. He'd walk the hallways at night, fingers tracing the wallpaper, remembering how his son used to chase shadows down the corridor, giggling. The echo of that laughter was now the loneliest sound he knew. His company, Cole Estates, was running itself into the ground without him. Investors called. Friends called. He ignored them all. The only place he went willingly was the cemetery. Every week, without fail, he'd drive there in silence. He'd sit by the marble stone engraved with his son's name, Jamie Cole, 2016-2023, forever my tomorrow. He'd bring flowers, sometimes the red toy plane they'd found near the wreck. He didn't know it wasn't Jamie's. Elena had owned the same model for comfort after Nora's passing. The irony would have gutted him if he knew. One evening he stayed longer than usual. The air smelled like approaching rain. His driver waited by the gate, but Ethan lingered. "Hey, kid," he whispered, running his thumb along the cold letters. "I don't know if there's a place beyond all this. But if there is and you can hear me..." His voice broke. "I'm sorry I wasn't there. I should have chased you. I should have..." The first drops of rain landed, each one a slow tear from the sky. Unseen by him, across the street, a battered van idled at the corner. Inside, Miles waited for the light to change. He was half listening to the radio when a small voice said, "Stop." "What?" Jamie's face was pressed to the window, eyes wide. "That's him." Miles followed the boy's gaze and saw the man by the grave. He almost laughed. "That's who?" "My dad." Jamie's voice trembled between certainty and hope. "That's my dad." Miles turned back to the road. "You're seeing ghosts, kid. Your old man's gone." Jamie didn't blink. "Then why do I know his face?" Miles didn't answer. He pressed his foot on the gas. The van rolled forward, the image of Ethan Cole shrinking in the rain-smeared glass until he was just a dark blur in a world of silver. But Jamie didn't look away. His hand, small and shaking, rested against the window. He could hear it again, the faint tick-tick-tick of a watch. It matched the rhythm of his own heartbeat. That night, after Miles fell asleep, Jamie sat by the window of the small motel room. The rain hadn't stopped, not since the day of the crash. It was as if the sky had made a vow to keep mourning until someone told it the truth. He pulled the toy plane from his pocket and whispered, "He's alive, The words tasted like electricity. From somewhere in the distance, thunder rolled. But it sounded less like anger and more like a promise. And for the first time in a year, the boy smiled. Not because he was safe, but because the world finally wasn't finished with him yet. The motel window was a television tuned to the weather. Gray picture, gray sound. Through it, Jamie watched the parking lot gather puddles like lost coins. He had learned to tell time by the size of those circles, by the way they swallowed the strip of neon until the sign read ELN, which he decided probably meant 11. Miles slept with the remote on his chest, mouth parted, boots still on. The television muttered infomercial promises to an empty room. Jamie sat on the windowsill with the toy plane cradled in his hands and thought about the man by the grave. Thought about the way grief made a person's shoulders fold in, like a tent collapsing in slow motion. Thought about a clock that ticked soft as rain. He had memorized that face when the van rolled past, and later, in the bathroom with the fan rattling, he had whispered the word he was half afraid to say out loud, in case saying it made it not true. Dad. The fan didn't correct him. The mirror fogged and kept his secret. By morning, the rain had thinned to a mist that made the air taste like clean stone. Miles shook himself awake, scrubbed his face with both hands, and stood, his joints echoing the motel's age. Up, he announced. We got the market today. Lunch crowd gives better than commuters. Jamie tucked the plane into his hoodie pocket. He had stopped asking to go home. The word made Miles's eyes flinch in a way that said no even before his mouth did. But the picture of the graveyard sat in his back pocket like a compass. Can we drive the long way? Jamie asked as casually as a kid could ask for a detour that might change his life. Miles dug in his wallet. Gas doesn't grow on trees. I could hold the sign, Jamie said as if that were a prize. People like it when I hold the sign. Miles looked at him, really looked, and something in his face went softer, then hard again like a wave hitting a rock. Fine, long way. The long way was, in fact, not long at all. In this town, every road found the cemetery eventually. The van rolled along the fence line, iron bars wet and shining. Jamie pressed his nose to the glass and tried to see the exact patch of earth where the man had knelt. No Ethan today. Only caretakers in green jackets wheeling a bin of carnations that had given up on being anything but carnations. He comes different days, Jamie told himself. He said he visits. He imagined schedules and days circled on tall calendars, and a car that knew these turns better than it knew its own house. At the light, a figure under a blue umbrella paused to let the van pass. A woman, face shadowed, coat the kind you wear when you're trying to be someone you're not. Plain, forgettable. As the van idled, her umbrella shifted. The briefest angle. Jamie's breath caught. The scar on her left eyebrow. A thin crescent like the smudge of a thumb. He knew that face too. Elena, he said, so quietly it might have been a cough. What? Miles leaned toward the windshield, but the light turned green, and the umbrella drifted behind them like a blue moon heading out to sea. Nothing, Jamie said, but the word was too full of everything to convince anyone listening closely. Miles wasn't listening closely. They worked the market strip with the practiced choreography of survival. Jamie stood near the bakery where the windows fogged with sugar, sign clutched to his chest. Help my nephew. We lost our family. People read faster when the words were short. They gave more when they could put their hands on a story. $2 at a time, sometimes $5, sometimes a coffee cup with a lid turned into a secret handshake. By noon, the paper cup was heavy. Miles took it, counted under his breath, nodded, and slipped a bill into Jamie's palm. Good work. Jamie stared at the bill the way you stare at something that both is and isn't a reward. Can I keep the plane today? He blurted. Miles frowned. You always keep the plane. I mean, Jamie said, flushing. Can I hold it while we drive? Miles shrugged. It's a toy, kid. Jamie shoved his hands in his hoodie and felt the plane's smooth wing. The red tail had dulled where his thumb loved it most. Across the street, the woman with the blue umbrella sat at a cafe table. No umbrella now, just a paper cup and a head bowed over a newspaper. The headline above the fold read, Cole Foundation announces shelter expansion. The photo was Ethan, older in grief, somehow both bigger and smaller than the man in Jamie's memory. The caption listed an address for donations. The article body, half hidden by a crease, told a tidy story about turning loss into charity. Elena's eyes traced every line like they were lines on a map that might lead home. She had left the hospital a year ago with a bag of clothes and a lattice of guilt that never stopped growing, no matter how she trimmed it. She'd moved 2 towns over, taken a job at a diner that smelled like coffee and rain trapped in linoleum, and tried to stay invisible. When she couldn't sleep, she walked the streets and listened to other people's lives happening through their windows. The low murmur of televisions, the occasional cackle of laughter that tried not to feel guilty for existing. The article found her the same way you stumble on an old song in a store and forget which aisle you're in. Ethan's face, the word shelter, the date today printed like a dare. She came back. Not to the mansion, not yet. To the market where rumor said a man and a boy had been seen, the boy with a face that tugged at a nurse's memory, a line cook's instinct. It was nothing, probably, but hope is a poor accountant. It spends with both hands. The first time she saw the boy, it was the way his body tried to occupy less space than his hope did. The way he glanced at every dark car that drove by like he recognized a specific shadow. The way he carried a toy plane like it was both an apology and a promise. Jamie, she whispered, and the name came out like a note played on a glass rim. She didn't rush him. Fear makes children run even when you're holding out safety with both palms up. Instead, she followed the van at a distance when it left the market. It turned not toward the city, but toward the old highway that crumbled into brush and memory. There, tucked behind a stand of pine and a billboard once advertising paint that lasted forever, she found the cabin. Smoke wandered from the chimney. A dog that wasn't there yesterday barked from someone else's land. Elena parked behind a stand of scrub oak, turned off the engine and listened to the metronome of her messy heart. You can't fix it, the sensible part of her said. You can't uncrash a car. You can't unleave a child who begged you not to. But you can do the next right thing, another part argued. The part that had learned grown-ups were just kids in taller bodies. She waited until dusk. A lamp blinked on inside the cabin. In its warm rectangle of light, 2 figures moved, the big one restless and pacing, the small one tidy and careful, setting the table like it mattered that the forks matched. Elena stepped out of the car and felt the hush of the woods hold out its hands for her. She approached the door and knocked. Miles opened it, surprise flickering into suspicion so fast it deserved applause. Up close, his eyes were a color the sky had forgotten. Gray, then blue, then nothing you could name. Can I help you? He asked, which meant probably not. I'm looking for a friend, Elena said. A little boy. Lost him about a year ago. She kept her voice even, her hands visible, her panic folded into neat squares in her coat pockets. He had a plane like that one. She nodded toward the table where the red tail gleamed in lamplight. Miles didn't turn his head. Don't know what you're talking about. Jamie appeared behind him as if conjured by his own name being thought too loud. His eyes met Elena's and widened. For a heartbeat, they were the only 2 people in the world who remembered a kitchen that smelled like orange peels and crayons, a blanket fort they called headquarters, a rainy afternoon when they read the same page of the same book 6 times and laughed anyway. Elena, he breathed. So soft the word didn't move the air. Miles half-turned, caught the shape of the name more than the sound, and something ugly unfolded in his jaw. He slid his body sideways, putting himself between them. Time to go, kid. We don't talk to strangers. She's not a... Jamie began. Elena lifted her hands higher, palms up, a gesture you use with injured animals and men who think kindness is a trap. I'm here to help. Help with what? Miles snapped. You gonna go back in time and unlight a fire? You got a wand in that coat, lady? Elena took a breath that tasted like pine sap. I can take him home. Miles laughed, a sound as bright and humorless as a coin dropped on concrete. Home? He doesn't have one. He does, Elena said, and her voice found its old shape, steady even when her hands shook. And his father thinks he's under a stone with his name on it. He goes there and talks to the ground. You kept this boy from that voice. Whatever you think you did for him, you also did that. Miles's face did something unreadable. A storm crossed it and kept going. He leaned against the door jamb as if it were a friend. You know what happens to people who take kids home? He asked. Courts, headlines, men with badges who don't care about nuance. They look at me and see a villain, and maybe I am, but villains have reasons too. I pulled him out of fire. I fed him. I kept him breathing. I taught him to read strangers so he'd live. And now you want to turn me into a monster so you can feel better at night? Elena didn't look away. I want him to stop standing in parking lots for money. I want him to sleep without listening for your boots. I want his father to know the truth. Behind Miles, Jamie's hand crept toward the plane. He held it out, not quite offering it, not quite using it as shield. Like kids do when they can't decide if they want to share or hide. Miles, the boy said. And the way he said the name had affection in it. An ache, and something else that made the man flinch. Can I see him just once? If he doesn't want me, I'll come back. The room tilted. The three of them felt it. Miles rubbed his face, then the back of his neck, as if searching for a switch that made the world simpler. He looked at the boy the way men look at photographs they keep in their wallets but never show anyone. When he spoke, his voice had lost its edges. You see him, he said, and he doesn't let you go, then what happens to me? Then you did a good thing, Elena said, and the words surprised her with how true they sounded. And good things don't erase bad ones, but they balance the scale enough to walk on. Miles stared at the floorboards. Tomorrow, he said, I need time. Tomorrow, Jamie echoed, and the word sounded different in his mouth than it ever had in his father's. It sounded like a door opening instead of closing. Cemetery? Elena asked. He goes near sunset. He always thinks maybe leaving at dusk hurts less. Miles nodded once, sharp, the way you nod at a deal you know will cost you. We'll be there. But if this goes wrong, it won't, Elena said quickly, and then slower, because hope shouldn't be loud. We won't let it. She backed away from the door like a tide retreating. In the lamp's rectangle, Jamie lifted the plane in a small salute. Elena touched the scar above her eyebrow and tried to imagine a version of the future where scars just meant we healed. Back in her car, she folded over the steering wheel and sobbed once, just once, like a cough you let out in a quiet church, and then breathed until the air remembered how to carry her again. Inside the cabin, Miles sank into his chair as if it had been carved out to fit his weight exactly. Jamie stood by the table, plane in both hands, a small ambassador between warring countries. Is he really my dad? Jamie asked after a while, not looking up. Miles closed his eyes. Yeah, kid. He's really your dad. How do you know? Because you said his face like a fact, Miles murmured. And because I saw him once too. Jamie looked up, startled. When? The night I pulled you, Miles said. He wasn't there, but grief was. Filled the road. It's a stupid answer, but it's the only one I've got. Jamie nodded as if that made perfect sense. Maybe to children it did. They ate in silence, the way families do when the news is too big to fit on the table. After, Jamie washed the bowls and lined them upside down like 3 small helmets. He went to the window the way people go to altars. Outside, the sky had stopped being gray and started being the color that happens right before blue remembers itself. Miles, Jamie said, nose to the glass. If I go, will you be okay? Miles snorted softly. I've been okay my whole life. It's a low bar. That's not what I meant. I know. Miles stood, went to the cupboard, and reached for the top shelf where he kept things he didn't trust himself to need. He came back with a small box, the cardboard soft with years. He set it on the table and lifted the lid. Inside lay a watch with a cracked face and a band that used to be leather and now was history. My father's, he said. Stopped the day he left. Never bothered to wind it again. He set it beside Jamie's plane. Your old man keeps time. You keep flight. Seems about right. Jamie touched the watch's cool glass with the tip of one finger. It didn't tick. He didn't mind. The important clocks were in people. Tomorrow, Miles said again, and this time the word didn't sound like an excuse. It sounded like 2 syllables trying to be brave. Elena didn't sleep. She drove to the cemetery and sat in her car where the gate threw its shadow across the hood. She watched a groundskeeper sweep water from a path that would be wet again in an hour. She rehearsed what she would say to Ethan. I'm sorry, and the word is too small, and I will carry the rest of it for as long as I live. She rehearsed saying nothing, and just stepping aside so father and son could fill the air with their own sentences. When the sun began to climb, slow and stubborn as a man deciding to stand up, the stone with Jamie's name on it caught the first light. It did not look like a trap anymore. It looked like a threshold. Echoes of the past were loud that morning, but for the first time in a year they weren't the only sound. There was also the future clearing its throat, and somewhere far from the cemetery, in a cabin that had learned more about love than it wanted to. A boy pressed his plane to his heart and fell asleep to the imagined sound of a watch that would be waiting for him at dusk. The next evening unfolded with the kind of fragile quiet that comes before storms or miracles. The clouds hung low, unsure whether to rain or bless. At the far edge of the cemetery, where wildflowers crept through the cracks in the old path, Ethan Cole parked his car beneath an oak that had outlived 4 generations of grievers. The engine died with a sigh, and for a long moment he just sat there, watching the gate swing in the wind. He'd told himself this visit would be short. A final one. He had to try letting go. The passenger seat beside him was empty except for a small wooden box. Inside it lay Jamie's toy plane. The red tail had chipped over time, but the shape was the same, the memory unbroken. He traced a finger along the wing and whispered, "One last flight, kiddo." Then he stepped into the dusk. The cemetery was soaked in silence. Damp grass brushed against his shoes, and every footstep made the faintest squelch, as though the earth itself were listening. When he reached the grave, the first thing he noticed was the flowers, yellow ones, bright and defiant against the gray. He hadn't brought those. He knelt down, set the wooden box beside the stone, and let out a slow, trembling breath. "Guess someone else remembers you too," he said quietly. The marble reflected the dim orange light from the nearby lanterns. His own reflection stared back at him, older, wearier, hollow-eyed. "I told myself I'd stop coming," he murmured. "That if I kept visiting, I'd never move on. But how do you move on from breathing?" His voice cracked. He wiped the rain from the engraved name Jamie Cole, forever my tomorrow. "I built towers, you know," he said, "and glass ones. Ones that reached the sky, but none of them ever touched heaven." He gave a broken laugh. "Guess I was aiming the wrong way." He looked up at the clouds, at the first shy drops of rain falling like punctuation on his grief. "If you're out there somewhere, kiddo, I hope you know I tried. I really tried." His hand trembled as he reached for the small watch on his wrist. It ticked softly, the only rhythm that still connected him to the world. "You used to fall asleep to this sound," he whispered. "Said it was your favorite lullaby." He smiled faintly, then bowed his head. "Goodbye, Jamie." Behind a row of maple trees, a boy stood in the shadows. His heart was a drum, wild and uneven. He recognized that voice, the deep tremor that used to read bedtime stories like they were secrets meant for him alone. The voice that told him tomorrow. The boy's name was still Jamie. He'd never really stopped being that. Even if the world had renamed him Kid, Nephew, Buddy, or worse, Nobody. His fingers clutched the paper flower he'd made earlier, white tissue crumpled from nervous palms. Beside him stood Elena, watching silently, her umbrella closed even though rain had begun to fall. "Are you sure?" she whispered. Jamie nodded, eyes fixed on the man by the grave. "That's him," Elena exhaled shakily. "Then go, sweetheart, before courage changes its mind." Jamie stepped out from behind the trees. The world felt heavier and lighter all at once. Every raindrop seemed to follow his steps. He stopped a few feet away, uncertain. The air between them was thick with all the words they hadn't said for a year. Ethan didn't notice at first. He was tracing the letters on the stone again, whispering something too soft to hear. Then, a sound, a small sob. He froze. Slowly, he turned. Through the curtain of rain, he saw a boy. A soaked hoodie clung to small shoulders, brown hair plastered to a too-thin face. A toy plane's red tail peeked from his pocket. Ethan's breath caught. The world seemed to tilt. "Jamie?" he whispered. The boy's chin quivered. "They call me Jame," he stammered, "but my mom used to call me Jamie." Ethan's vision blurred. He stumbled forward, afraid that if he blinked, the boy would vanish into the rain like a trick of grief. "It's you," he whispered, voice breaking. "It's really you." Jamie took a half-step back, clutching the paper flower. "Are you mad at me?" The question cracked something deep inside Ethan, something older than guilt, older than words. "Mad?" he repeated, sinking to his knees in the mud. "I thought I'd never get the chance to be anything but sorry." Jamie's lip trembled. "You didn't come." Ethan's tears mixed with rain. "I thought you were gone." His voice faltered. "They told me you were gone." Jamie blinked up at him, eyes full of confusion, fear, and the fragile hope that keeps children alive when reason can't. But I was here. I kept dreaming you'd find me. Ethan reached out slowly, his hand shaking. I'm here now, son. I'm here. The boy hesitated for only a second, then ran forward. The paper flower slipped from his hand, floating down into a puddle as he crashed into his father's arms. Ethan wrapped him tight, terrified to let go. He pressed his face against Jamie's wet hair, breathing in the scent of rain and dirt and life, the smell of miracles. I missed you. Jamie sobbed into his shoulder. I missed you every day. Ethan's voice broke completely. I missed you every breath. They stayed like that in the downpour, two broken halves becoming whole again. The ticking of Ethan's watch filled the spaces between thunderclaps. Steady, alive, the heartbeat of time remembering mercy. Elena stood beneath the oak, hands clasped, eyes shining. It wasn't her story anymore. It had never really been. But watching them, father and son tangled in a hug that rewrote a year of nightmares, she felt something uncoil in her chest. Ethan finally looked up, still holding Jamie. His eyes widened when he saw her. For a moment, the air between them went still again. Elena, he said, the name like a breath carried too long. She stepped forward slowly, rain running down her face. I didn't mean to take him, she whispered. He followed me that night. I thought I was protecting him. Then everything, her voice cracked. The crash, the fire, the man who said he could help. I believed him. Ethan's jaw tightened, grief and fury wrestling in his silence. I tried to find him, she continued. When I saw your picture in the paper, I came back. I thought you deserved the truth. Jamie looked between them, eyes wide. Dad, she saved me. Ethan looked at his son, then at her. His expression softened. Not forgiveness yet, but the space where forgiveness might live someday. He nodded slowly. Then thank you. Elena broke down, her hands covering her mouth as she sobbed. Ethan placed a hand on Jamie's back, steadying him. Let's go home, kiddo. Jamie blinked up at him. Home? Ethan smiled faintly. Where you belong. Weeks passed. The Cole mansion no longer echoed with silence. Laughter, tentative at first, then sure, and filled the halls. Ethan rebuilt his life not with business meetings or contracts, but with breakfasts burnt at the edges and pillow forts that kept collapsing under their own ambition. He'd reopened the children's shelter he'd once funded in Jamie's memory, but now he named it Tomorrow House for every child who thought their story had ended too soon. Elena became its director, quietly helping others heal the way she wished she had been helped. On the first sunny Sunday of spring, Ethan and Jamie returned to the cemetery. The grave was still there, white marble glowing in the light. The yellow flowers had wilted slightly, bending toward the earth like they were listening. Jamie held his father's hand. Is that still me? He asked softly. Ethan looked down at the stone, then at his son. It was, he said. But not anymore, Jamie tilted his head. What do we do with it? Ethan knelt and placed his watch on the grave for a moment, letting the ticking fill the still air. We leave it, he said. It reminds me what I almost lost and what I found again. Jamie smiled. Can we bring flowers? Sure, Ethan said, ruffling his hair. What color? Jamie grinned. Yellow? Like the sun when it forgets to be shy. Ethan laughed quietly, his heart lighter than it had been in years. As they walked away, the wind stirred through the trees, carrying the faint rhythm of a ticking watch, steady, unbroken, infinite. The rain had finally stopped, and for the first time in a long time, Ethan Cole no longer cried for what was buried. He smiled for what had been found. The end.
Thank you for watching. If this story moved you, leave a like, subscribe, and let us know in the comments what part touched your heart the most.